All right, Ramblers, let's ramble. We've got another exciting show today. One of the things that comes up in class a lot with regard to rights and freedoms, constitutional rights, civil liberties is, do I have to talk to police when they stop me on the street? So I wanted to get a really accurate answer for this. I didn't want to give my students just kind of some general answer. So I thought, let's go to an expert. And what we have today is Faisal Joseph, a lawyer for over 35 years in his community. He has the Law Society Medal. I don't know what that is, so I had to look it up, but it sounds important. And I wanted somebody to talk about this issue. And then when your name came up, I had to jump at the opportunity. So thank you very much for joining us today, Faisal.
My pleasure.
So the first question right off the bat is the issue is about carding, street searches. So let's just talk about carding first of all. Definition: what is carding?
Well, the easy way to put it for your listeners is that it's when there's an opportunity for the police for no apparent reason. They see you walking the street and all of a sudden they stop you without any reasonable and probable grounds. You haven't committed an offense. They haven't seen any offense committed. And they decide to stop you, detain you, ask you questions, and put you in that position. And most people, when they have that situation, which they're not used to, when they have the police, stopping them, usually their position is that they're going to try to help out the police and answer any questions that they have, et cetera, not knowing what their rights are. And unfortunately, the police don't tell them what their rights are until they're forced to, and that would be in a position where they've been arrested or they've been detained.
Yeah, people don't realize this, but they really don't have to be honest with you when they're on the street, right? I mean, they can actually lie if they want to, can't they?
Well,
Or is that a gray area?
it's not a gray area. It actually goes further than that in Canada. Believe it or not, um, you've heard of a lie detector test. Many people, the police will ask them to do a lie detector test. Lie detector tests do not measure truth. What they measure is your involuntary responses, your heart rate, and your pulse and various other things. Nothing to do with truth. If you're a nervous type of person and you're confronted by somebody in authority, you may correctly give your name, but you're so nervous by the person that's a police officer that you don't pass a lie detector test. There are other people that are pathological liars that can lie from Monday to Tuesday and have absolutely no problem and can pass a lie detector test because it's not going to, if they believe their lie, it's not going to have any effect
We call them
on their
politicians.
results. Well, I can't comment on that, but you get the idea. So with respect to a policeman being able to lie to you, they can lie to you and they do lie to you. For example, I've been in situations in a lie detector test when somebody's gone in for one, they've passed it, and the police have told them that they failed it. And then subsequently, they give a confession. Now, the interesting thing about it is the lie detector test results are not admissible in court, but his confession afterwards is. So they can lie, do lie, and that's part of the interrogation, which is why lawyers tell clients or potential clients not to answer police questions because it can be taken out of context. You need legal advice to know what it is that you're getting into, and they're not going to, and they have no responsibility to tell you what your rights are.
Yeah, and people don't realize that they're actually trained. They're trained interrogators, right? They're trained to elicit information from you. So they'll say something like, "Hey, your buddy's in the other room and he's ratting you out." May or may not be true. It doesn't matter, but they are trained to use these tricks.
That's
Tricks.
right. And the results of that interrogation can and usually will be admissible under the right circumstances. So they're trained not only at the police schools, but they're also trained in psychology and human behavior. Whether you're making eye to eye contact, whether you're crossing your arms, whether many different things that psychologists will tell you with respect to human behavior that will give them a clue as to whether you're being truthful or not.
One of the alarming things you said right at the beginning when we were talking about carding is just by its very definition, there's no probable cause. There's no reasonable suspicion. Do they at least pretend that there is, or do they, where there is carding, do they not even do that? Do they just say, show me your ID, ask me who, and just start asking them questions?
Well, London was a good example of that. Back in 2016, we had heard that there was carding going on in the city of London. We contacted the police board, we contacted the chief of police, we contacted other lawyers, and I'm sure not surprising to your listeners, the vast majority of those people that were being carded were either Indigenous Aboriginal people or Blacks. That's not a coincidence as far as I'm concerned. Um, the percentages of numbers of that group of people that were being carded, they would approach them on the street. They would ask them their name, what they were doing, where they were going, what their address was, who their friends were. Could ask them and continue to ask them anything, and didn't need any reasonable or probable grounds to do that. And in some cases, when they didn't answer questions, were either detained or arrested. And then the lawyers had to get involved. So back in 2016, this carding issue became a political hot button in London. Myself and various other groups from the civil liberties organizations and other lawyers and other groups that found this offensive. And really what it is, it's a form to me of racial profiling or religious profiling. If you want to profile, you should profile criminal profiling, based on the acts or what they've done, not based on the color of their skin or what kind of a religion they have. We had a lot of that sort of thing going on after 9/11 in the Muslim community. And now, back before 2016, we had it going on in the Indigenous and Black community. And it was so preposterous that we put this information before the city council and to rid ourselves of this carding policy. And believe it or not, the chief of police at that time had indicated that he was not going to conform with a 13-0 vote by the city council, and that he wasn't going to give a receipt. And what the receipt was a reason for the stop. That if you were going to continue this type of thing, you at least had to give a reason why you were stopping them. And the chief of police and the London Police Department refused to do so, which I thought was completely outrageous and breached the Charter of Rights. And you can imagine why they didn't want to give answers. And they didn't want to give a reason, because if they had stopped the same person 8 times and they didn't have to give a reason, how would a lawyer like myself or somebody else challenge it? I can't say how many times they were stopped. I can't say what the reason was why they were stopped and if there was any validity to it. So that was a very big issue back in 2016. And to our knowledge at this point, although I haven't been up on it in the last couple of years, but from what I know, that policy as a result of city council was gotten rid of.
We that's crazy. We'll talk about how I mean, one of the problems when you deny people civil liberties is that you can use it as a tool to target groups. So we'll talk about that in a second. Let's talk first of all and just get right into it. Let's get right into what our rights are. So, college student, Friday night, come out of Joe Cool's with their friends. Police officer comes up to them on the street and just starts asking them questions, says, "Can I see your ID?" So, what is your advice to that student?
Okay, so let's start from the basics. Usually, police officers can only stop you under certain circumstances. One, if they suspect that you've committed a crime. Two, if they see you committing a crime. And three, which people aren't that aware of, if you are driving.
Right.
Because driving isn't a right, it's a privilege. So they can stop you from driving, and people say, well, have I done anything wrong? The first question I would ask the police officer is, why are you detaining me, or why are you stopping me? So if they say, we're stopping you because we have a ride program, or we've just seen you come out of Joe Cool's and you're walking funny, or we see you with a can of beer in your hand, then that's going to give them the grounds to go further. In fact, if you're going towards your car and you're coming out of Joe Cool's and you have those sort of symptoms, They can go so far as to even look inside your car without searching your car. They need a search warrant to be able to search your car or have reasons to believe a crime was committed by having the beer in your hands and you go to get into your car, etc. So if it's at night, they can take their flashlight, take a look inside, but they can't search it unless they have reasonable and probable grounds that you've given them.
So like
So
plain view doctrine almost, right? So if they can
and
see it
that's
in plain
exactly
view.
what it is.
Okay.
That's exactly what it is. So they can look in there with their flashlight, but they can't go further than that without your consent.
And on the street, what
And
can
on the
if they
and
come
on the
to you?
street,
Yeah.
if they come up to you, now let's take the example, instead of coming out of Joe Cool's, you're just walking up Richmond Street and you're with a couple of friends. And as you're walking up, two police officers pull up to you and ask you to stop, get out of their cars and start asking you questions. At that point in time, there's no apparent reason for them to be able to do that. There doesn't appear to be any reasonable and probable grounds. And at this point, you should say to them, what's the basis on which you've stopped me? Make the distinction of whether or not you've been detained or whether you've been arrested, because if you've been arrested, you have certain rights, rights to counsel and various other things. If you've been detained, it's a different situation. Ask those questions, and if they refuse to answer those questions, then make it very clear, because normally now you'll see a lot of these police officers with camcorders on them, et cetera, that everything can be recorded. Object to the search and object to the questions.
Um, a lot of people are, I mean, they're just too nervous, right? To
Right.
ask these questions. They're just too nervous. They're afraid of authority. They're young. What are some tricks that they should be on the lookout for so that they don't get caught into any traps?
Well, I guess we'll do two situations. One where they're stopped and they're being asked questions and there's no basis to ask the questions. The first thing I always say to them, because it may be being recorded and you should do it anyways, is be polite to the police officers. Don't be argumentative with them, because you may get the wrong police officer and it's your word against their word as to what actually happened. And you may have a few bumps on your head. And we don't want to talk about some of the things that can happen with some police officers that aren't obeying the law. So in those sort of situations, be polite, ask if you've been detained, ask if you've been arrested, and ask on what basis they're asking you these questions. If you're driving a car and they ask you your name and your address and they want to see your registration papers, that's perfectly fine. If you're not driving a car, they don't have that basis unless they believe that you've committed an offense or they've seen you committing an offense. So if they don't have any of that, that's the way you play it down. And you're not going to win the argument with them. But at this point, no matter how difficult it is, police are going to say things to you. Well, what are you hiding?
Mhm.
Or the first thing you say, if you're not guilty, what do you got to hide? Why won't you talk to me? Why won't you answer my questions? Um,
Don't you want to
you
help the community? Don't you want to help us
of
solve this
course,
case?
of course, and it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with things being taken out of context. It has to things being taken where part of your answer is given and you're cut off, and the rest of your answer isn't given. That can put you into hot water. And it's very, very important for people, and it's hard. But the best thing to do is say, look, I'm sorry, but I want to speak to a lawyer first. And if you don't have a lawyer, legal aid can be provided for you. Make sure that you have those rights given to you, and make sure that the police officer affords you the opportunity. And just don't answer the question. You can give them your name. You can give them your address, depending on whether you're in a car or not. But after that, if they can't give you a reason and they can't tell you whether you've been detained or arrested, you don't have any obligation to answer any of their questions.
Yeah, I love when I watch television and you see these interrogations, and I always want to scream at the television screen, "Stop talking! Ask for your lawyer."
I'm going to give you a terrible example. It's actually factual. And the only reason I can give you this example is because it's a case, the Heartbleed case you might have heard of years ago, where a young man and I think he was 17 at the time, had broken into Revenue Canada's computers in the Department of National Defense because he wanted to see if he could do it. He was a genius, and he was able to do it. And he was arrested. Before he was arrested, he had gotten some good legal advice from me. When he was taken down to the police department, he was denied access to me. I had literally camped out at the police department for over 6 hours while the RCMP were questioning him. He told the police on dozens of occasions that he was not going to answer the question, that his lawyer was waiting in the lobby of the police department, that he wanted to give advice. They refused to give him that opportunity. And they told him things like he was Mexican by background, that he looked, they said, Arabic. He looked like he was Muslim. And they were going to put out, if he didn't answer the questions, they were going to put out to the media that he was under suspicion of being a terrorist. And that was going to be in the newspapers. And his father was a professor at the university. And this was going to cause all sorts of grief for his parents. That didn't work. Then they tried, well, we understand you come from a very religious Catholic family. And what would Jesus say if you didn't give the answers, and you're a religious person? And they went that route, and that didn't work. And then they went to denying him opportunities to go to the washroom, and various other things. So lots and lots of these things happen. In that case, the kid was strong enough to hold his own. He didn't give any answers other than his name and his address. But they held him in detention for over 6 hours and snuck out through the back door of the police department while I was still waiting in the lobby to talk with my client. So it's not just on TV. These things happen more frequently than people would believe they would happen. And it's not a regular thing that occurs, but when it does occur, it's pretty serious, and the repercussions can be drastic for the rest of your life.
When you're talking about the rights that we have when we're being detained or being arrested, so they're pretty much universal in Canada, right? Or are we talking, or does it differ from province to province, state to
Well,
state? Obviously, is different as well.
that's a good question. In Canada, it's federal law. So the criminal code is federal jurisdiction. So the criminal law is the same in Nova Scotia as it is in Ontario or anywhere else in Canada. If you're dealing with provincial statutes, okay, careless driving and those sorts of things, that's provincial. That can be different from province to province, but it's usually the same sort of thing. There may be little changes on them, but not much. So one is federal jurisdiction, which is criminal code offenses, and one is provincial offenses like careless driving and other regulatory things that come under the provincial statutes.
Okay,
And in the United States, the laws are similar as well, but they're not the same. There are differences from state to state.
right, and whatever doesn't come under federal jurisdiction under the 10th Amendment goes to the states, anyways. Which
That's
right,
correct. So we have our Charter of Rights,
right,
and they have their constitution.
yeah. So then, let's say in a province like Ontario, is every city going to have a different carding policy?
They can.
It can, right?
They can. They can. And back in 2016, I was shocked and surprised to find out that there were many jurisdictions that had carding, some that had it and didn't like it and changed it, and some that never agreed to have it. So you have your police board, which makes policy, and then you have the police and the chief of police who's involved in the operational side. But in our case in London, the chief of police, even though it was 13-0, said he wasn't going to comply with the ruling of a unanimous decision of the city council who employed them.
This is nuts. I always assumed that the community tells the police how they want to be policed, not the other way around.
Well, that's exactly the way it's supposed to be, and that's what we have a police board for.
So usually when they take away people's civil liberties, they usually cloak it around security and fear. What was the rationale? Was there something going on? Was there a rash of burglaries? Were there people going around in fights? What was it at that time that you saw that was like, you know what? The police just want to start going around carding people, or they want that power to start carding people more often. What was the excuse that they were giving publicly?
Well, they tripped over themselves quite a bit. I have to be honest, it didn't make much sense. And the letter I sent to city council showed the hypocrisy of what their arguments were. But what they were trying to argue was that it was an investigative tool, quote unquote. Well, an investigative tool can be used, but there's this funny thing called the Charter of Rights that we have in this country. And, it's kind of disgusting that they couldn't give an answer for why, if you were Black or Indigenous, it might be 8 to 10 times more likely to be stopped by the police and carded than if you had your shade of color of skin or my shade. And they weren't able to give an answer for that. And we know the reason for that. It's nothing more or less than racial or religious profiling, and it's been proven. And here's the funny thing. The police used to also argue that it was for security reasons as well, to protect the public. Well, can you imagine if you're Indigenous or Black or just somebody that's been regularly carded? And I've known Black judges in Canada, in Ontario, in London, in Windsor, that have been carded, have been pulled over for no apparent reason other than their dreadlocks and the color of their skin until they get their ID and find out they're a judge.
Right.
So, you know, it's not a nice thing to talk about, but unfortunately it's here, and hopefully it's not here to stay. But if we don't speak up, a lot of people, don't understand that this is an issue. You're having this program, but I'll guarantee you that out of 10 people, I'll guarantee you that 8 out of the 10 don't even know what carding is.
Yeah, that's why, I mean, it's important as well because people will always assume, I mean, this is what typically happens when people's civil liberties are being taken away is first we look at the person and then we decide whether or not their civil liberties should be taken away, which shouldn't be the case. In the cases that we're supposed to be treated equally before the court, right? We get treated differently by the court. Supposed to be the same. So people will say, oh, well, you know what? If they're carding Indigenous people and, people that look like terrorists, you know what? I don't really have a problem with that. Yeah, but you don't have a problem with it until it happens to you. And trust me,
Yeah.
it will happen to you at some point.
Yeah, and when they were talking about, an investigative tool, or when they talk about security issues, I would argue the opposite, that it causes security issues. Because if you're Indigenous or Blacks and every Friday, Saturday night, you're being carded on the streets of London, there's a lot of animosity. There's a lot of ill will towards the police, to all police, when you're being treated this way. And not all police officers are like that. And that causes, for me, a security issue with the police. That in fact, instead of making us more secure, they're making us less secure because of the way they're treating people. And they're treating people differently based on their religion or based on their race.
Yeah, and there's listen, I've dealt with and have known because I used to coach. So I used to coach a lot of cops' kids. There's a lot of great cops. And the thing is, the great ones are going to, if you have the system of carding, now all of a sudden, every time they have an interaction with someone in the community, somebody may perceive them as a threat, which just escalates tension in the community.
100%. And that goes to the connection between law enforcement and everyday people on the street. And, when you talked about that guy, well, it's an Indigenous person or it's a Black person, he's probably guilty. He was charged. He must be guilty or the police wouldn't have charged him. That's racist. And just because that's how they feel, that doesn't mean that's the way it should be.
It's also
Because,
irrelevant.
90% of those people are never going to get stopped by the police. So they don't have the same experience to go through, and they don't understand back in the World War II in those days that by eroding your civil rights, it's just a matter of time before it gets to your group.
Absolutely, it always does,
and
especially when we talk about free speech. What we found over the year, what you find is basically the people that are fighting for it a lot of times aren't actually fighting for free speech for everyone. What they're doing is they're want to use it as a tool for their group, for their ideology or their political party. And carding can be used that way. It can be used to intimidate It can be used to shake down any group that you don't like, people with the wrong hair color, the wrong sex, whatever. I mean, it can be used as a tool of oppression.
And it is. And it is. And, people find this very hard to believe. But as a lawyer for 40 years, doing criminal and civil law, prosecuting and defending, um, people don't understand. There are circumstances in which people confess to things they haven't done to avoid worse situations. If you're told, well, if you just tell us this, or you just tell us that Bobby was involved with this, we'll let you go after 8.5 hours. You haven't used the washroom, you've been in a cell, you've been threatened, whatever the circumstances are. People don't understand how the human psyche can break down under those circumstances. And, not
Absolutely.
everybody's as strong as everybody else. And a lot of the people, unfortunately, that the police come in contact with, they're not going to come into contact with you or I on a daily basis. They may be homeless. They may be people that have mental health issues. There may be several different factors that are involved with it. And those people are at an even stronger disadvantage and need more protection than the normal person on the street. And in fact, they have less,
They have less.
which is, we have to speak up for them.
The was carding when it first started becoming popular in New York. I know Giuliani did it as part of a stop and frisk um, program where they would just basically stop, frisk people. They said they based that on the Terry law in the United States, which was BS because there were elements there were a precursor to a crime. So they're taking something where there was an Officer McFadden, great name for a cop, basically was catching pickpockets, but the precursors to the crime were he saw them going up and down the street 3 times separately, stopping at a jewelry store, I think it was, then having a meeting at the end. After all of that, he basically stops, frisks a guy, there's a gun. Supreme Court says that there's enough there that they saw a precursor to a crime, right? That they were casing out. Now we're going ahead and we're saying, no, we don't even need that. We don't even need reasonable suspicion.
But it's funny because we just talked about this. That's why I said we need criminal profiling. And that's why I said they have that right when they see or have reasonable probable grounds to believe that an offense was committed. But just to go willy-nilly and stop anybody for anything, I mean, look in the United States, we've seen these cases where a guy is accused of stealing a cigarette, not a pack, one cigarette, and he's put into a chokehold and killed.
Yeah.
I mean, that was an extreme case of carding. I mean, that was a joke, but people died as a result of it. And we've got countless examples of this sort of thing. So exactly what you're saying in the precursor is what it has to be there. And why does it have to be there? So that we can protect and make sure that these things don't happen. Because if it's going to be your word against the police officer's word, it's going to be pretty tough in a courtroom.
Yeah, do the work. If you see something, then put the time in to see if there's some evidence there. But this idea of, because if we want to take it one step further, if we want to be totally safe, if security is everything that we care about, then just stop everybody every single minute of the day. Then just stop. If somebody goes in the restaurant, stop them and find out what their criminal record is. But we don't do that because,
Well, they did that in Nazi Germany, didn't they?
yeah, I mean, this idea, I honestly believe in the old adage that, if you give up a little bit of security a little bit of freedom for a little bit of security, you deserve neither. And again, this idea of just stopping people on the street that have done nothing wrong, they're just minding their own business. And again, if you're saying, no, that's not always the case, they do have reason. Well, if they have reason, then they don't need to card them then, correct?
100%. 100%. Just follow the rules. And
just follow the rules.
It can even go further. I remember a case years and years ago when I was practicing in Nova Scotia back in the 90s, where I was a prosecutor, and I had a case come to me where somebody had been pulled over and some drugs had been found on the person, and it was a Black person. I had asked my secretary, I knew who the officer was, and I had some familiarity with the accused, that he had been arrested before, just from my memory, because it was in a small town. And at that point, I asked my secretary to go and get the files where that police officer was involved in stops with drugs. and she pulled out 10 files in the last 4 years. And in all 10 files, every single person that was stopped for drugs had drugs. But what was interesting about it, Dean, was that the black person's left driver's rear tail light was out. So every single person that got stopped, when the police officer would go up to that side of the car, somehow magically, that tail light on that side of the car was cracked or busted, so that hypothetically he had reasonable and probable grounds to pull the car over under the Motor Vehicle Act because the light wasn't working. Well, obviously, that case didn't go forward, and we dealt with that police officers. But that's when they're even following the rules that you got to be careful of how the rules are followed.
It's true. And listen, if you think we're making a big deal out of this, all you got to do is go on YouTube, and there are channels devoted to police officers basically trampling on people's rights every single day, right?
And again, they're not all like that.
Right.
Okay. And you've said that, and I say that, and I wouldn't do their job for all the money in the world.
Exactly.
But I will tell you this. If we have in London 800 police officers and 10% or 5%,
5%, 1%.
you're talking dozens of police officers. And we've got bad lawyers, we've got bad announcers, we've got bad media people, we've got bad judges, we've got bad. Why would they be, any different than anybody else in society? So the difference is the repercussions of a bad police officer making a bad decision on a human being's life, particularly if they're coming into contact with people who have had trouble with the law in the past. They're not going to have any credibility in a courtroom.
Absolutely. And the 1%er can actually cause a lot of damage all by themselves.
Absolutely.
And if they're mentoring the next young police officer, and it's like, yeah, just take another shot, give them another punch.
Or, it's a phenomenon. This isn't anything either one of us is making up. The blue wall. If you've got some officers that are senior that, want to sort of police from 30 years ago versus the way they're policing today, and you're a young police officer in his first year or in his first bust, there's a lot of pressure on you.
Absolutely.
A lot of pressure. And I'll tell you one of the funny things in a courtroom that lawyers love to do, especially with the several police officers, we exclude witnesses, including police officers. So there's 10 witnesses, and you and I are witnesses. We're police officers. Well, Mr. Joseph decides to exclude both of us to get evidence. So you get into the courtroom, and Mr. Joseph asks you, so you didn't read Bobby his rights, did you? It was Officer Joseph that did the rights. Well, yes, that's right. And Officer Joseph gets up because it's excluded. He doesn't know what the other officer says. And he says, it was Officer Dean that did the rights. And by the end of it, nobody read his rights. And the judge is looking, wondering, what the hell is going on here? Somebody has perjured themselves, or they all have. So, it's these things happen. And again, policing is a tough job, but you make it much tougher and much more dangerous by not following these rules and by not following our charter.
No, it is a tough job. Every situation they're in is that person's worst day, and the police officer is dealing with everyone's worst day. So every situation they come up with, they're dealing with somebody who is having their worst day. But they do use tricks. I mean, if one of I don't know if it was, I can't remember which case it was, but they put an undercover officer in the cell, and he basically tricked the guy into getting this information. And I think the Supreme Court actually used the word trickery right in the decision, where it says they're not allowed to use trickery to obtain a confession. So we know we don't come up with that ruling unless they're doing it, unless they're using tricks.
And I mean, it would shock the conscience of people to believe, and I gave you the example about a lie detector test, that a police officer can lie to you in the form of their investigation. That would shock a lot of people. They wouldn't believe that.
But no, you're right. Yeah, because
they do.
That's
they can, and they
one
do.
of one of the first things I tell them is they're allowed to lie to you. They're allowed to to give you half truths. They're allowed to basically say anything they want. When it
And
comes
wear you down, and wear you
and
down,
wear you down,
psychologically and
because
physically.
like you said, if you're in there for 6 hours, when you're talking about you were talking about ride programs, which are constitutional, but only for the ride program, right? So if I get stopped in a ride program, I have to give them my ID, got to say whether or not I've been drinking or not. If they say, hey, you mind if I look in your trunk? That's different, isn't it? What do you say to your clients then?
Well, and the funny thing is that when they say that, they don't tell you that you don't need to.
Of course.
That's not their job, right? And if you don't, what are you hiding?
Exactly.
So, this is why programs like yourself and people that are more aware than the general public like yourself, it's very important for us to be able to educate people because I'm just, I'm trying to think of that 17-year-old kid, RCMP, London Police, OPP, they were all there. And you're surrounded by 7 or 8 police officers looking down on you, smashing their hands down on a desk and not allowing you access to a lawyer and
They're
telling you
big
things
because
about
they've
your
all
parents.
got all the equipment. They're huge. Even the
they're
small
they're
ones are
they're
huge.
they're in your face.
They're
They're
in
in
your
your face.
face.
First they're trying to be nice to you, and they're trying to be nice to you, and they're trying to, tell you that God will reward you, and then when you don't, God's going to punish you. That's a lot for anybody to handle. And
And
like I
if
told
yeah,
you, there are people that I know that if you put them on a lie detector test and they said their name and their address, they fail
I know
because they're just that nervous.
yeah,
They're that nervous.
absolutely. The most honest people can fail those,
100%.
and the biggest liars can pass them.
100%.
So a good general. Well, actually, before I go any further, is there an age um, limit to when they can and can't question you, or like if a kid's 13, 14 years old?
Well, that's when you're getting into the Young Offenders Act because they're not an adult, and there's certain rules that apply to them, but the principles are the same.
The
And
principles are
in
the
those
same.
cases, because they're 13 or 14 years old under the Young Offenders Act, they used to be called juveniles under the Juvenile Delinquents Act. We've changed that. Um, you'd have to contact their parent or guardian.
Right.
So
I
there
think,
are ways to protect them of their rights as well.
yeah, I'm remembering this one case, RVAM, where the principal told all the kids to leave their backpacks in the hallway, and a sniffer dog came, sniffed the bags. One of them had marijuana in them. Kid gets charged with possession and trafficking. And they said, no, you can't do that because the dog is basically seeing through the fabric. So you couldn't, that was unconstitutional.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there was no reasonable probable grounds if you got an individual to criminal profile, but an entire school.
Yes, you're going
Give
to
me a
sniff
break.
everybody.
Why don't we do the city? What's the difference?
Exactly. And when people say to you, what's the big deal? You're making too much of a big deal. Just, what? Just help them. Just, don't be a jerk. Don't have attitude. They don't get it. They never see the stories, do they? They never see the negative stories
They never do until
until it happens.
it happens to their son or daughter, or a neighbor's son or daughter, or their cousin, or somebody that they know. Right? Then all of a
Absolutely.
sudden it's an issue. Then it's an issue when it's your kid that's been abused.
All right, let's do finish up strong with a little role playing. We're on the street.
Sure.
You're 20 years old. You look like you when you were 20 years old and you were going to law school. Police officer. You're with a few of your friends. Hey, how you guys doing tonight? Hope you guys are having a good night. Can I mind if I see your ID?
Um, Officer, I'm having a great night. Is there any particular reason that you want to see my ID?
No, I just want to see your ID and your friends here. Just make sure everything's all right.
Well, officer, with the greatest of respect, if you've got a good reason that you need to see my ID, I'm more than happy to show it to you. But unless you can give me a good reason, I'm not going to pull out my ID just for walking on the street.
Hey, is there something that's wrong? Or you got something to hide, or what's going on with you?
No, no, it's just that I know what my rights are, and am I being detained?
No, you're not being detained.
Have I been arrested?
No, you have not been arrested.
Well, if that's the case, then I choose not to show you my ID. I'm not driving a car. I'm just simply walking up the street with my friends. We're not doing anything wrong. And If you want to go any further with it, I'd really appreciate it if you'd let me take my phone out and call my lawyer.
If we were in the car and I said, you mind if I take a look in your car? And you said, no, I don't consent to that. And I do it anyways.
Right?
Should you say something at that point? Should you say, even though you're searching my car, you want it on record that I do not consent?
Absolutely. Critical, important question. So even if he goes and gets it and he finds the marijuana or he finds the narcotics or whatever that he finds, I say at this point, do you have reason? If he stopped you, what did he stop you for? So we don't understand that. If he doesn't have a reason to stop you and he wants to look, say, officer, um, I'm not giving you authority to search my car. If you want to get a search warrant, then that would be fine, but I'm not giving you authority to search my car. Because even if he gets the stuff, that's not the end of the day. Because Dean, what happens is lawyers like myself or the Crown, if they're an ethical Crown, will understand that that evidence can be excluded because it was inadmissible, because they didn't do it through the Charter of Rights.
Exactly. And because you said I don't consent and you've made it clear a few times, as you're having these interactions, do you need to be, first of all, should you ask if it's being recorded if you're not recording? Or can you say to your friend, can you record this so that nothing funny is going on here?
This is touchy stuff. This
Okay.
is touchy stuff. And the reason it's touchy stuff is, to me, the police officers now, 90% of them have the camcorder on them. They have the video on them. But I have seen charges where people, for example, downtown Richmond Street, and there's a brouhaha going on, and the police officers, let's just take a hypothetical, are putting the boots to somebody, and there's a bunch of people around that are filming it on their phone, and they're screaming for the police officer to stop, you're hurting him, he's not doing anything, he's not resisting. Well, the problem with that is I have seen those people being charged for, quote, obstruction of justice. We're interfering with a police officer's duties. So you got to be very, very careful. But I would try it. And if they have an issue, it's going to come out later on. Why did you have a problem with me videotaping?
Do they automatically have their camera on?
Well, that's
Or
another
is that
thing. They're supposed to,
okay?
but you would be amazed at how many cameras inadvertently get erased.
Yeah. Or
Erased.
for some reason, I don't know if you saw the case in the States recently where she clearly has mental issues. She calls the police. Police come there. One officer has his on, the other one doesn't for some reason. Nobody knows why.
Right.
And he ends up shooting her in the face. And so she's there. She calls the police for help. She ends up getting shot in the face. But one of them didn't have his camera on. Why? Why did your partner have his on, but yours didn't? Should you say when you're having this interaction, excuse me, officer, are you recording this? Is there, and you would? Okay.
I would.
And would
Because
you also say,
if he is recording it,
and would you ask their name as well, like to get that official? Say, can you tell me your name and thing?
You have a badge there. You have a badge name, right? You can read it there and what the badge number is. I want to have all of that information.
And again, to everyone out there, best advice ever: don't talk, ask for your lawyer. Right?
Pretty good advice.
Pretty good advice. Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate this. I think this is going to give a lot of people, knowledge is always power. This is what we do. This is what Prometheus did, which is why they plucked his guts out. But everybody needs to know what their civil liberties are, because if we don't protect them, again, like you said, one day it's going to bite you on the ass, or your friend or your son or your daughter. So you have to protect it for others, especially those that you don't like. Right? The Miranda laws, if people knew the Miranda case, they would have said, I disagree with it, put him in jail.
100%.
But because the Miranda case, guess what? You have the right to remain silent. And that's a great, great thing.
Well, you're doing a real service to the community by doing this, because I'll guarantee you that a large percentage of our population has absolutely no idea about the contents of what we've discussed and how important those rights are.
and we'll try to get it out to as many people as possible. So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, but you don't go anywhere yet. I just want to say goodbye to you off screen, but to everyone else, we'll be seeing you soon. And remember, don't trust anyone over the age of 30.